Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Centerville Grace podcast, where every single week we're doing our absolute best to bring you closer to the message and closer as a community. The full gang is back together and we're doing it live. What? Well, let's do some introductions.
Hey, I'm Dave.
And I'm Dusty.
And of course, I'm Tony. It's great to be back together. Hate missing it last week. Yeah, guys. This has been the first time all three of us has done this live. Are we worried at all about any of the tangents?
No.
My
mouth says no, but
I'm real confident on that one. We'll see how it goes.
It'll be fine. We operate with grace here at Grace, and I'm thankful for that.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and start with our our highlights of the week. Highlights of the week last week. Pastor Dave, what you got for us? Highlight from last week.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm excited. My son, Sam, has taken up golf, like serious enough to join the golf team. So we've been working on our swing. We've been going out. We went out. I took him and Ezra both out last Friday night to the golf course, and we had a good time. And I'm really excited to see him grow in his love for such a beautiful game as golf. It's heavenly's game. It's the game we're all going to be playing in heaven, I think.
I hope so.
I do too, man. I can't wait to see some courses in heaven. But
it's Olympic kickoff week, which is a big thing in our household. So we've been watching all the sports, and this year I've tried to learn some of the new sports that I didn't realize were Olympic sports. So that's been really fun. Like, I feel like I finally got the rules around rugby. I'm more into soccer this year. I figured out trampoline was a thing. And then there was some other game on yesterday where there were looked like a mix of golf and hockey and something else. I'm still trying to figure out that one, but it was on TV and it was interesting to watch. I think it was just called cool or something.
How great was the women's rugby? American women rugby.
Medaled for the first time, in history?
Did you see that last play?
That woman trucked that other woman. I about fell out my chair.
Woo! That was great.
That's an intense sport. I'm trying to teach Declan, how to be tough out on the sports court. And I'm like, listen, we just need to watch a little bit of rugby, watch how they get tackled, and don't whine about it. And that's what you need to do, buddy.
Just get up.
I will tell you that the basketball teams, women and men's, both bring me back to the 90s dream teams. Like, I just love that feeling. Like, it's just fun to watch. And of course, the women's gymnastics, classic, they're rewriting history books every time. So
Golden Girls.
Love the Olympics.
Yep.
So good.
I would say that my highlight of the week is definitely I had a family reunion. I was out of pocket last weekend, so I got to go see some family. And my brother from Florida was in town, and they were here for church on Sunday and then stayed with us through the reunion. So such a blessing to be with them. I'm always thankful to spend time with family. And a weekend reunion's perfect because it's just enough time to spend time together, but not enough time to really annoy each other, I think. So.
And shout out to the mustache of your brothers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So funny story real quick, and then we'll get on to something important. I told a whole bunch of people that my brother was coming and that they should recognize him by his really bad mustache. And sure enough, there were at least two people that pulled it off without missing a beat, talking about how bad his mustache is. And so I was, as a big brother, it really filled my cup. I just appreciate our church family coming through strong on that.
Yeah. Anytime you want us to make fun of a bad mustache, we're here for you.
We're on it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's maybe jump into the text. How about that?
Let's do it. So we are in Luke chapter 12 this week, starting in verse 35. We're going to work our way all the way through 53. So here's what Jesus said. Be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning like men waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. I tell you the truth, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose masters find them ready, even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would have not let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." Peter asked, "Lord, are you telling this parable to us or to everyone?" The Lord answered, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, 'My master is taking a long time in coming,' and he then begins to beat the men servants and the maid servants and eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour he is not aware of, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. That servant who knows his master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it's completed. Do you think I have come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3, and they will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law."
Whew.
Whew. I feel like it needs a dun 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 at the end of that.
Why does it always feel so like ominous? Like this part of the text is like
we're getting into it. It's a lot of ominous warnings coming.
Why do you think, as Christians, as readers of the text, it's so important for us to get these kind of warnings? I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Dave.
I mean, Jesus was by far the smartest, wisest man, and he knows that when he leaves, we're gonna be tempted, and we're gonna have tendencies, and he knows what those tendencies are going to be, and he's addressing those now. And I think we need to take heart to these things, because he knows us so well. He knows our hearts, and he knows where we're going to go to. After 2,000 years, think about that. After 2,000 years of not having Jesus walk on the earth, he just knows what we're going to be tempted to do.
Dusty, as you listen to something like this and you think about all these warnings, how do you process this kind of text?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about tensions, right, in scripture. And the go-to with anything relating to Jesus is always, hey, Jesus is love. Jesus is, let there be peace on earth, a song that we might sing around Christmas time. All these things that we assume this is the entirety of who God is. But there's also a piece of warning for us. And I don't think it's not always this ominous thing, even though it reads in an ominous way. I think it's always a challenge to make sure that we are living the way that God desires us to live, right? So like we talk about the parental figures that we have in our lives, and God being one of those. And, just like our parents, it's not always, hey, I love you, keep doing the right thing. Like it is that a lot of the time, but sometimes it's, hey, I need you to do better in this area. Hey, I need you to know that there's ramifications for your actions. So I think if we're really going to understand a relational God, we have to, and God has to show us the entirety of the relationship. And while it does lean heavily on love, like that was the greatest love that God ever did, was sending his son to die for the sins of all mankind, there's also this real piece of discipline and readiness. And like, hey, it's not just about, us just trying to love everyone and everything in the world. It's also this giant piece of, hey, there is a challenge here, there's a mission here, and I need to make sure you're staying on the right track. So tension to manage, like always.
Sometimes that feels like such a cop-out answer, but the hard part is that we know it's true. And I think one of the things that I continue to wrestle with in my faith walk is that that there are always consequences to the choices and actions that we make in our relationship. Dave, I loved your story at the beginning of the sermon about the car and your buddy and your aunt coming over and all that stuff. I wanted to ask this on the podcast. What did your dad say?
He says, quote, "I'm grounded for a week." So that's in quote. I said, "What am I grounded from?" He says, "You get to choose." So that's
taking next week off of work. You got to.
That's fair. Sorry, guys, I'm grounded.
Hashtag parental discipline.
Oh,
No, he enjoyed it. He enjoyed it.
Dusty, I'm curious. What's the thing that you did when your parents were gone? Can you share it?
Oh gosh, there's just so many. I don't know if I can pick just one. I mean, my parents, it was so interesting growing up because my parents gave me a lot of freedom, which, I could probably say that's why I ended up as independent as I am, as I had a ton of freedom, with a good amount of trust in there. And I will say I typically mostly did the right thing minus a few phases in life. But I mean, there were times that it was not so much what I did, but it was more responsibilities that I think I ran away from that I always felt bad about after the fact. So I always feel like I kind of punished myself more than I got punished from them.
If I ever did anything that was a little bit out of line, my parents were divorced, and so I would use one house against the other. Like, hey, I got something over at mom's, or hey, I got something over at dad's, and that wasn't always the case. But for the most part, pretty good kids.
Well, I hear it's always the smart kids that rely on manipulation, right?
When you think about this text, Dave, what's the area that, I mean, you kind of nerded out on it. I'm looking at my notes here. A lot of this conversation is about the ascension and the return of Jesus. Why is this such a theme in this part of where we are in Luke's gospel?
Again, he's he's headed to Jerusalem. He knows what's coming, and he's got to get his disciples ready, and he's got to get everybody who's not on board. He's begging and pleading basically in so many ways, like get on board with what's going to happen. And he's preparing them now for his departure and for his absence, a great absence, a long time absence. And this is just part of the part of the preparation before he leaves. So the ascension, and I geeked out on the ascension a little bit. I don't know if I need to do it again in the sermon or in the podcast, but I did in the sermon. And I think that's such an important thing that we don't really talk about, and why that's so important.
I was curious about that. Why do you think that we are so, I guess, ambivalent about it? Like, so just nonchalant about the ascension. It's interesting is I was listening to this on our live stream, driving back from the family reunion, and I was like, he's absolutely right. I don't deal much with the ascension. Why do you think we're so meh,
Because we're not Jewish. I think that's a
Dusty, what about you? Why do you think, since Dave froze?
That's all right. I don't know if I can answer his thought, but he's got a point there. There's a lot of things that we view, especially in the evangelical lens, as we call ourselves resurrection people, right? Yeah. So because that's where we see the ultimate victories in the resurrection of Jesus. A lot of times we forget about what had to come before it. Oh, I think we lost him completely. He'll be back.
He'll be back.
But it's in the same way that we kind of focus on what heaven is, when a lot of times we're called to actually live in the present to help model what the kingdom is here on earth. And sometimes we just get that mixed up a little bit. It's much easier to think of the end game than it is to think of everything that came before it and the absolute miracle that was there as Jesus ascended, because with that came a promise that, hey, I'm going to return. But he left the disciples in the dark for a while with that ascension. And there's another giant tension there because they assumed that the victory was going to look a whole lot different than what it did. So, there's so many things that if you ever talk to a rabbi, I think you can get such a deep understanding for when it comes to how to interpret these parts of scripture that we don't really deal with a whole lot on the evangelical side of things.
Dave, before the connectivity was disrupted there, you were saying that one of the reasons that you thought that we may not really focus much on the ascension is because we're not Jewish. I was hoping you might be able to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think, don't you love technology, by the way? It's great.
Live, baby.
Live is good. The average Jewish person understanding both the role of the Messiah and the high priest would pick up on this a lot quicker, easier than what we would in 21st century America, not really having a context for either one of those in our everyday lives. The scripture doesn't, explicitly explain all this. I mean, the book of Hebrews does a little bit with the high priest role in the temple, but there's just not explicit texts that point to like, this is why it's so important and this is why it's so important, as much as the crucifixion and the resurrection. Paul really emphasizes those two issues more than others, and I think that's why we do it as well, for whatever reason. But I think it certainly is important, and I think it needs to get a little more airtime than it does.
The next part of the sermon that's really interesting is this idea about the prophecy about when Jesus is coming back. Now, I want to be really, this part of the sermon really sparked a conversation in our car about when Jesus is coming back. And it's not an area that I focus on much at all. Why do you think, people really wrestle with this question? I mean, obviously the obvious answer is because when he comes back, everything's going to change. But why is there such a need in our culture to nail down that exact date and time?
Because it's such an important, it's going to change everything. And Jesus says you need to be ready. So I think this human nature to go, well, give me the time and I'll be ready, and I can slack off and do whatever I want until then. But I think there's there's a desire for people to see what they read in Scripture. I think they want to see what Scripture says come to life, right? I think they want to see those things piece up and go, aha, yes, and just give them that much more confidence in everything. I think there's probably a million reasons why, but as I said, it's almost a futile effort. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about end times things and talk about prophecy. Prophecy is very important. Book of Revelation is very important. But at the end of the day, we are just not going to get it figured out. I just don't think we're going to get it figured out. So,
yeah, for me, it's an exercise that it actually makes me frustrated.
It is, yeah.
Especially when I see Christians online, which is typically where I will see it. Like, if you go down a weird part of Instagram, there's all of these kind of prophecy people profiles, right? Who are making, who are out there doing just bizarre. I mean, like, I'm not saying that it's not of God or whatever, but like some of these, I'm like, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? Like, and the truth is like, it just doesn't change what I'm going to do today.
It shouldn't, right? It shouldn't change at all. Yep.
Dust, any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, man. I think we just experienced a lot of that with, I don't know if you guys were around for the Olympic opening ceremonies and all the giant amounts of Facebook things that happened because of that. And like, let me put it in a little bit of context. I'm going to be real clear on this, just for myself. I think a ton of this comes from fear. With people, because the assumed question is, oh, it can't get any worse than it is now, right? That's always the question. And if it can get worse, I don't want to see it get worse. That must mean that Jesus is coming back soon because, oh my gosh, look how terrible the world is and look how distraught everything is. So, I think there's a mistake in how we view end time. Sometimes we think that's it amounts to this bit of escapism of like, hey, we're almost there. We're living in the end times all the time. The reality is, guys, the church has always lived in the end times. The church has lived in the end times for 2,000 years. There's been so much that's come to pass, and I'm not even fully convinced that, things are as bad right now as they have been at other points in history. I think that's just an assumption we make when we don't really study history. But it's like, it can get worse. And I don't say that to scare anybody. I say it to encourage that, hey, we are already living in the victory of Jesus. Okay, so no matter how bad things may get, and usually our perspective and our culture shapes a lot of how we view how bad things are, it's really all about living in the victory. And we want to believe, and we need to believe, that we have a mission here on earth that is for right now, that God has, chosen, groups of people all throughout history to do things that help bring the kingdom forward, because that's the way God has chosen to work with his creation. And, I just think, man, if we focus on that, we're not going to focus on looking for, oh, I saw the white horse at the Olympics and that represents I saw this all over the place. It was, I saw this in Revelations. It's like, no, it's Revelation, not Revelations plural. Like, we're going to get it right before we start going into all this weird prophecy stuff. And, you know, it's like, it annoys the heck out of me, to be honest with you. And I know, like, I'll give nuanced answers to a lot of things. That's one area that I always want to be crystal clear on. I think it is silly to focus on trying to figure out when Jesus is going to return. The church has been trying to figure out for 2,000 years. I think a much better use of our time is figuring out what can we do in the present to help participate in the kingdom of God.
Fiery Dusty is my favorite. Dusty.
I'm stopping right there.
Drinks coffee, sips it, takes a deep breath.
Oh, yeah.
The next part of the message, we transition to a really interesting tension that's I think something that I wrestle with personally, and that's the difference between stewardship and ownership. I wanted to make sure that we hit this on the podcast today, because I think that there are a lot of our church family who are listening who want to be more in the stewardship realm, but end up becoming owners. And so, you know, I'm curious, Dave, we'll start with you. How do you manage the tension between being a steward versus sliding into ownership? How do you prevent yourself from becoming an owner?
Yeah, this always goes back to the fundamentals, quiet time, worship, all those things that take the eyes off myself and back onto God, and remembering it's his. I'm here because of his grace. And it's simple things like that every day, every morning, that is what you need to start with, I think, personally. That's what I do. And throughout the day, it's just reminding yourself of, who am I here for? I think that's a question that I always come back to, is who am I here for? And it has to be, I'm not here for me. I'm here for God. This is his story. He's writing it. I get to be a part of it, but this is his planet. This is his body. This is the family I'm in. It's his family, not mine. He just is giving it to me for a time to steward, to take care of, to love, to be responsible for. But ultimately, it's all his. So it's not easy, because the world screams, it's all yours. Do what you want with it, right?
Dust, same question to you. How do you avoid ownership?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. You know, I grew up with a lot of focus on working hard for musical ability, and I kind of lived in that realm for a long time. And when you work on that solely, you work on one thing over and over again. I think the same is true of somebody that's really good at a sport, that's, you know, really good at what they living, right? Any craft that you develop, you hear over and over again, they're like, man, that's some talent. You must have worked really, really hard for that. And the reality is, in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, I did work really hard for that. Like, it took a lot of practice hours, a lot of dedication. So it's really easy to say, this is mine. Whatever I get from this is because I put the work in, and because I put, you know, the effort in. So I deserve everything I've got that comes out of that. So that's always where you want to go if you don't have God in the equation. The reality is, hey, any gift that we have, any ability we have, whether it's speaking ability, in preparing and giving a message on Sunday, whether it's, you know, podcast ability, whether it's musical ability, sporting ability, everything we have is only by God's good grace, regardless of how much effort we put into it. Because I try to remind myself, man, no matter how much effort I put into it, God gave me the energy and the able-bodiedness to do that particular thing. And sometimes just the financial means to work on it for that long, to be able to take lessons and to go to school. And like, all these things are gifts from God in the first place. No matter how much we think we put our own effort into it, that's just a way that God desires to use our skill sets for his glory. So that's probably the biggest thing for me, is just constantly reminding myself that none of it was mine to begin with, but I'm always trying to use it well.
I also think one of the ways that battle ownership is with gratitude, right? And to I just constantly giving thanks to God for, like, like you said, like, Dust, every good thing in my life is from God. And I kind of hear that from both you guys, is this idea that I just want to be thankful. I'm so thankful for God for these opportunities that we get to have and what we get to do. And in gratitude, I can stand in awe of what God has done and continues to do in the midst of my life and my family. And like, we didn't we didn't pick this, right? Like we didn't pick our families. I mean, maybe we picked our wives if we get a little bit of credit there, maybe. But truthfully, I know both you guys, we got picked, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like they said yes to us. So
after a lot of pleading,
we were in high school. My wife didn't know any better. So it's just that idea about gratitude for me, I think is super important. The last area that I wanted to kind of make sure that we cover is the Mr. Beaver quote from C.S. Lewis. It's one of my favorite. When it came up on the screen, I was so glad that you used it, Dave, because I just think it's great. He says, "Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting the lion." "Safe," said Mr. Beaver. "Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good. He's the king, I tell you." What does it mean to you guys to serve a God that's not safe but good?
I mean, I'll take a stab at that. For me, that means taking big risks for God, honestly, because God is not safe. If we're going to do something that has meaning for the kingdom, then it's not going to be safe. And often we get stuck in trying to hedge our bets and weigh out the risks versus reward, and we do that in church circles. We do we personally. But at the same time, this goes back to stewardship in some way. If I recognize that everything is God and comes from God, everything is God's, plural, and comes from God, then I also have to be willing to really push myself to take risks for God because he took risks for us, right? So if I know that nothing I have is mine, then I can probably be a little bit more generous than I think I can be. I can probably be a little bit more risky and maybe trying a ministry or doing something outside of my comfort zone that I may not do naturally, because that's what it is to serve a God that is not safe. And I think that, the compulsion for us is to be safe Christians. But I think the reality is we don't need to be safe Christians. We need to be a little bit more risky Christians in a lot of ways.
That's good. Risky Christians. You should put that on a t-shirt. Reverend Holmes.
Yeah, I think when I think of God's not safe is that he's king, that he does what he wants and he's allowed to do whatever he wants. And I can't control that. To me, when I think of safe, I think of like manageable, controllable. I can just set it on cruise control and I'm safe. God is not that way. And what God did yesterday doesn't mean he's going to do it again, the same thing today. In fact, he probably is going to do something different because he's a creative God. He never healed. It seemed like Jesus never healed the same way twice, right? So he's not predictable. He's not. I can't put him in that box that I want to, and I love that, and that terrifies me at the same time. That's the scary part. Is like, oh man, yeah, like, whew, I gotta keep watching. I gotta keep looking. I gotta keep seeing where he's moving, and I want to be where he's at, and I want to keep following. And he may take me to places that doesn't feel very safe. It's not comfortable, and it's gonna be hard. But he's good, and I think that balances everything out. Like, okay, it's not going to be safe, it's not going to be pretty, it's not going to be fun, but it is going to be good. It's going to be good for me. It's going to be good for his plan. So I got to remember that aspect as well.
Yeah, I would say for me, safety is a feeling that I get to decide, right? And so in some ways, feeling safe is about me being in control, and then him being good or king is really about his very essence. And so I don't want a safe God, because then I'm limited to what I feel versus who God is. And so I really want to lean into that whole idea about God's going to take me to places that I've never been so that I can experience something that I couldn't imagine. And for me, that sounds more like what Jesus did on earth.
Yeah.
If I'm one of the disciples and Jesus says, "Come follow me," like he does in Matthew 4, right? Like I'm probably not going to follow him if I know how it ends, right? At least, prior to the resurrection, right? So it's like, eesh, it's not very safe. The whole trip is not very safe. That's not a safe trip at all, but it is good.
Yeah,
it is good.
It's good.
Any other closing thoughts on the message? Where are we going next, Reverend Holmes?
Where are we going next? Well, we are going to be, I think, continuing a little bit more on this idea of complacency this Sunday. We're going to skip a little bit at some verses just because of time's sake, but we're going to be getting into verse 20, was it 22 in chapter 13 and onward, or no, sorry, verse 18 and onward through like the end of the chapter. So we're going to skip the first part of chapter 13. So I would encourage everyone at home, go read it, go study it for yourself. But for time's sake, we got to keep moving. And next week is about the kingdom, or this Sunday is about the kingdom. And really don't get comfortable and don't get complacent again as far as how we get into the kingdom, I should say. So I'll leave it at that.
Teaser. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we end our time together, let's get into our PRs, our pastoral recommendations. Reverend Stark, what you got for us?
Yeah, I've mentioned this one once before, but I've recently finished it, or at least 99% finished it. So I'm going to recommend it again, especially in lieu of our current political climate, because we are in election mode now, and election season's right around the corner. So that always creates a little bit of a sticky situation with the church, and how much do we get involved with that kind of stuff. So the book I'm going to throw back out there, I truly believe, especially after finishing it, every Christian who tries to follow Christ and try to understand history needs to read this. It's Jesus and the Powers, N.T. Wright. And really, it's a incredible theological and historical treatise on what the church's relationship with power has always been throughout history. So how much the church got entwined with what we'll call the empire, and the dangers that come alongside that when the church gets too far into it, but also the dangers of staying out of it completely. So, we often talk about, nuance and what's the right balance of the church participating in the community effort, but also not getting so overtly political that we end up picking sides and trying to claim moral superiority. So all these really intricate things N.T. Wright explains so beautifully in this book. So Jesus and the Powers, I believe it will stop you from putting whatever you're about to put on Facebook or on Instagram for the next 4 months, or at least I hope it does. And I can't recommend that one enough, especially for these next couple months. It's a great read.
Yeah, I would say for me, I'm doing some work with a group on disciple making, and we're kind of going over some of the bicycle. And so the bicycle illustration by Justin Gravitt, it's a great resource, strongly recommended. It gives a really great overview on what we talk about when we talk about intentional disciple making. So if you're looking for kind of a bigger picture overview, I'd recommend going to justingravitt.com and checking out the bicycle. It's a great little tool, super easy and accessible, very visual, obviously. So it's good. Dave?
Yeah, I'll be a little bit transparent right now. I'm going to start doing some counseling. So I'm going to break the stigma of going to counseling. You don't have to be, a giant addict of something to start doing. I just need some heart checkup. I need someone to talk to about some stuff. And so Tony recommended his guy, so I'm going to start doing that.
I love him. He's strange, but I love him.
Yeah. So let me encourage everyone. If you feel the need, find a guy, find a gal, jump in. But I'm looking forward to it.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Well, guys, that's our podcast for today. So excited, as always, to dive into the text with each and every one of you. As always, if you have any questions, each and every one of us are embarrassingly easy to find. You know our emails, you know how to connect with us. And if you have questions or thoughts about the sermon that you want to talk about and get a question answered on the podcast, please let us know. We are here for you. That's why we do it all, so that we can grow closer together in God's word. So until next time, we'll see you guys real soon.